We are continuing to read Called to Serve, Autobiographies of Don and Dorsan Roth, Part 1, which is the first half of the book that Dad wrote, Chapter 9, Far Eastern Division, 1965 to 1975, with a subtitle, The Best Years of My Life. The 10 years that we served overseas were the best 10 years of my life. I have often told persons this when we discuss the possibility of overseas service. The years 1965 to 1975 proved interesting, inspiring, and challenging. I took 56 different trips outside of Singapore in the performance of my duties. So that's an average. We were living in Singapore. So that's an average of 5.6 trips a year. We planned and executed.
You had a...
No, this is Dad. Dad did these 56 trips.
Oh.
We planned and executed 3 furlough trips to the USA, 1968, 1971, and 1974. An additional trip took place less than a year after our arrival in the Far East, a visit to America with the Japan Missionary College Choir in 1966. More about that trip later in this chapter. We arrived in Singapore on August 18, 1965, shortly after the city declared its independence from the country of Malaysia on August 9. We witnessed the birth of a new nation as we took up our new and very challenging work in an overseas venue. There's a photo here titled Entrance to the Far Eastern Division Office at 800 Thompson Road in Singapore. Division Secretariat. I found that my work largely involved the Secretariat of the Division. Elder Edwin Gibb, the Division Secretary, earned a year-long furlough in his home state of Missouri. Huge assistance in my new work came from Elder Chris P. Sorensen, Division President, and Elder Harry D. Johnson, the Treasurer. New things to do came up every day. I did not even know how to write a cable, so Elder Johnson helped me every time I needed to send one to some distant destination. I also had help from the President's wife, Mrs. Della Sorensen, as I took up the task of editing the monthly periodical, the Far Eastern Division Outlook. She had served ably as editor for many years, but needed time to do other things with her husband. Within a year, the Sorensens decided on a permanent return for retirement at the 1966 General Conference session. When we arrived in the division, the membership stood at just 164,278 in 1,710 churches scattered all over the Pacific Rim region, as well as the islands of the northern and central Pacific Ocean. During the course of that first year in the office, I had to learn everything about the job, making up an agenda for the week.
Could you just slow down a little bit?
Oh, okay, sure. During the course of that first year in the office, I had to learn everything about the job, making up an agenda for the weekly meetings of the division committee, writing minutes of the meetings, taking care of the flood of communications which daily came into the office via regular mail, P.O. Box 226, Singapore, cables, and telephone calls. I also learned how to process
Where was the... It was in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think what building or...
I think we're going to get to that.
Oh.
I also learned how to process all of the calls that came from the unions, voted by the division, and then passed along to the Secretariat of the General Conference for them to fill with competent workers in various areas of the division. Working with inter-division missionaries. The territory of the Far Eastern Division included Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia.
How many of those have you been to?
I would have to think about that. Laos, Vietnam, Malaysia, Guam, and many of the Pacific Islands, and Singapore. We had nearly 300 overseas workers located in every region of the division. Part of my responsibility included much of the paperwork involved with furloughs and permanent returns. To do all of this, I had the able assistance of Elder Gibbs' secretary, Fay Welter. In
Fay.
time, you remember Fay Welter?
I remember the name.
Yeah. In time, I sent through a call for Shirley Hutchins to come to assist in the work of my office. Poor health forced her to return after a couple of years. Then we sent a call through for Jossie Fay to not only become my secretary, but also to be managing editor of the Far Eastern Division Outlook.
So, you helped Jossie Fay.
No, Dad. Dad and Jossie
okay.
Fay worked together.
You were still young.
I was just 6 years old. So this is Dad writing all of this.
Yeah.
So I'm just reading Dad's writing.
Yeah, okay.
Her help during her stay in the division was outstanding. Writing minutes became the most difficult job for me, a task I had never before handled in my work in the United States. Elder Gibb had told me that he never left the division building after a committee meeting until he had either typed up the minutes or dictated them for his secretary to write the next day. Minutes for approval were given to the other two officers for their corrections and then shared with the committee members. A mountain of work followed each committee session. I also had the responsibility of taking care of the quarterly statistical reports required for the General Conference Secretariat. An annual task included preparation of material of the Far Eastern Division for the official SDA yearbook. All of this material came from the 10 unions of the division, plus the Guam Micronesia mission and the attached union mission of Hong Kong/Taiwan. I found that I had little time left to do the work I really loved to do, writing and public relations work. It was not until a full-time division secretary came a year after our arrival that I started doing public relations work for the division. The next section is titled Two Special Events. As I reviewed the events of our 10 years overseas, two events quickly came to mind to mention in a special way. The first was the tour to the USA with the Japan Missionary College Choir in 1966. Robert Burchard gave invaluable help on the tour. Robert Burchard. The second involved the evacuation of 430 national workers and laymen from the country of South Vietnam when the communists from the north marched in to take over Saigon the last week of April 1975. Both were never to be forgotten events in my personal encounters with mission adventures. Both of these events will be described later in this book. Even though I spent long periods of time on business trips to various parts of the division, there was time and opportunity to do things with the family. So here's a photo that says Don with the Japan Missionary College Choir on their tour of the USA in the spring of 1966. Fun with family. During our 10 years in Asia, we took 3 furlough trips to our homeland. The first took place in 1968. We planned in advance to spend about 4 weeks traveling in Europe and then 2 months visiting relatives. We discovered that fellow missionaries, Paul and Betty Emerson, and their 3 children, all about the same ages as our children, had a scheduled furlough at the very same time, so we decided to travel together. After stops in Calcutta, Agra, Tehran, Lebanon, Israel, and Greece, we rented a Volkswagen microbus in Zurich, Switzerland, and traveled through the Alps, then flew on to Paris, London, and the USA. So this was my first time ever in Switzerland, and I think this started my love of Switzerland to this day, because Kathy and I are going to Switzerland in September for almost a month. Well, Germany and Switzerland for a month. Dave was still in the academy when in 1969 he and I took a long train trip from Singapore to Chiang Mai, Thailand, with stops in Penang and Bangkok. We also crossed the Mekong River from Thailand and visited Laos.
Visited where?
Laos. Laos.
Laos.
That was a country. What an adventure for both of us. Later, Dave went back to Thailand to do some summer photography for the Far Eastern Division Office of Public Relations. When Dave finished academy work in 1970, he and a friend, Steve Shipowick, took a 6-week tour of the Middle East and Europe while en route to the USA. By the time he began college, David had visited about 15 countries of the world. It was also an adventure for Dan to go, along with his father, in 1970 to attend the General Conference session at Atlantic City, New Jersey. I distinctly remember that. My mother and
Where
father...
was this?
This was in Atlantic City, New Jersey in 1970, GC session. My mother and father also attended, so we stayed with them in the same motel. They provided some supervision for Dan while I worked with our division's exhibit and other Far Eastern Division business affairs. Our second furlough trip took place in 1971. Our travels took us to Thailand, Burma, Pakistan, Lebanon, Egypt, Italy, and Germany. Doris's mother and father met us in Amsterdam, and we traveled together in a Volkswagen microbus to Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, Austria, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and England.
That
And
was a wonderful
I distinctly
trip for
remember that trip as well. So I was about, 13, 14 years old. Okay, there are some photos here. The first one is the Roth home at 6 Westlake in Singapore. Right there. Okay, so I have a story about that. 6 Westlake, just 6 Westlake.
Well, you're remembering all these things because you were younger when they happened.
In 2010, which was 12 years ago, I had a business trip to Singapore. And I went to 6 Westlake to look at it. I rang the bell and knocked on the door. There was a car in the driveway, but no one came to the door. And then I went to the Singapore Island Country Club. I went to have a fried banana and
A fried banana?
multiple other things. Yeah, fried bananas were famous in Singapore. Okay, the second photo, the Roth family visited Greece on a furlough in 1968. They traveled with the Paul Emerson family. And that is that photo. The next one is, during the family stay in the FED, son David graduated from Far Eastern Academy in 1970. So that's this one right there. And then Don was in charge of the Far Eastern Division booth at the Vienna General Conference session in 1975. I distinctly remember that because I was 16. And I worked there as a courier or a runner. Okay.
Courier, a runner.
Yep. Oh, here's one more photo. A welcome visitor for Don was General Conference Public Relations Director E.W. Tarr. And there's the photo.
What's his
there.
first name?
Just all I have is the letter E.
E.W.
E.W. At our stop in Beirut, Lebanon, we spent several days with my sister, Esther Marion Runge, who with her husband Ernest and 3 daughters served as missionaries at Middle East College. It was fascinating to view firsthand the culture of the Middle East, especially after we had spent several years in the Far East. On our way back to Singapore, we visited Hawaii, Guam, and Manila. Dan and I stayed in Singapore until the end of the school year, and then we flew to the USA with stops in Tokyo and Honolulu. We spent a Sabbath in Tokyo and then boarded a plane that night for Hawaii. Because we crossed the international date line, When we arrived in Honolulu, it was still Sabbath. Dan found it hard to understand why we could not go swimming upon our arrival. We reached a compromise by attending the Honolulu Central Church in the morning and going swimming in the afternoon. What I remember is that we went to church in Tokyo on Sabbath, and then we flew to Hawaii, and then we went to church again because it was also Sabbath. But then we went swimming. Okay. A father-daughter excursion took place in August 1972 when Diane went to college. I had an appointment in Korea, so Diane traveled with me as far as Japan. For a week, we traveled together to many points of interest in Japan. We stayed mostly in hostels, a new experience for both of us. Our third and last furlough occurred in 1974. Doris left early so she could attend the 50th wedding anniversary celebration of her parents. She visited Taiwan, Japan, and Hawaii en route home. Diane and Dave, students at Pacific Union College at that time, met her in San Francisco. Graduation at PUC. This furlough included several family events. In June, Dave graduated from a 4-year course in Pacific Union College with a communications major, and Diane received her degree in early childhood education, a 2-year course. Okay, so there are 6 pictures on the facing page. The first one is Dawn usually arranged Sabbath afternoon programs at the division year-end meetings. The second is Dawn speaking to a group of young people in an outdoor Sabbath school class on the island of Palau. The third one is Elder E.W. Tarr and Dawn visit with mountain tribal people in the Philippines. The fourth one is Dawn and Dr. Harry Miller visited the gravesite of Abram LaRue, pioneer worker in the Far Eastern Division. The fifth one is, one of the highlights was the visit of the Voice of Prophecy Quartet and HMS Richards Jr. at the division. And the sixth one is Dawn visiting friends in Thailand. So there are the 6.
We have some writings that are very important, huh?
Absolutely. Weddings. 2 big family weddings took place in California. Dave and Kathy Curtis married on June 30 in Galt, her hometown. This is in California.
Kathy Curtis.
Yep, where Kathy's father was pastor. I participated in the service. Diane married Charles Castle on July 14 on the campus of Pacific Union College. I officiated at their ceremony. After their honeymoon, Dave and Kathy headed east where he started his first job with the New England Sanitarium and Hospital. Kathy worked in a doctor's office. Diane and Chuck stayed in the Angwin area where he finished his college work before taking his first job with Cedar Lake Academy in Michigan. So, here's
the end?
This is the end of the chapter, but there's one picture. Dawn took this picture of Queen Elizabeth when she visited Singapore on an official state visit. Queen Elizabeth. How about that?
I'd have to have
a magnifying glass. So here is the photo that Dad took of Queen Elizabeth. So Queen Elizabeth just had her Jubilee celebration of 70 years of being on the throne. Isn't that something? Okay, so that's the end of chapter 9.